Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear members of the committee. My colleagues and I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to speak with you today regarding public safety of Canadians and foreign interference as it relates to the Government of India. As this committee will understand, while we are here in full collaboration and ready to answer your questions, you are convening this meeting in the middle of important public security investigations, which therefore limit what we can share. We are not in a position to provide details on evidence. However, we can share with you the rationale for concern for public safety, and we can speak about our attempts at cooperation with India and how India's refusal to cooperate led us to where we are today.
Law enforcement has been investigating extreme violence within communities, and CSIS has been looking into India foreign interference for years. As you are aware, on September 18 of last year, the Prime Minister announced in the House of Commons that Canada became aware of credible allegation based on intelligence of a potential link between the killing of a Canadian citizen in Canada and agent of the Government of India. Since the Prime Minister's statement last year, the government's response has followed two separate tracks: law enforcement and diplomatic. The diplomatic track addresses our relations with the Government of India in many areas. And the law enforcement track has focused on public safety and the application of the rule of law. Public safety of Canadians has been the paramount consideration for all our actions when evaluating our relationship with India. We do understand and value all India represents to Canada as an international partner, as well as our significant people-to-people ties. However, we cannot ignore the attempts by agents of the Government of India to engage in coercion and violence in Canada and to undermine our democracy. The RCMP has also sent resources to work directly with India's Central Counter-Terrorism Law Enforcement Agency to allow for cooperation on violence extremism. Il est important que le public.
It's important for the public to understand what steps have been taken toward cooperation with India throughout a series of meetings. Since August 2023, we have been clear that it is essential for our officials to maintain meaningful channels of communication and cooperation with India. Specifically, we have had engagement between Canada's NSIA, my predecessor and myself, or other Canadian senior officials from GAC, CSIS, or PCO, and India's National Security Advisor on 6 occasions, namely August and September 2023 in New Delhi, November 2023 in Dubai, December 2023 in Saudi Arabia, January 2024 in London, and March 2024 in Dubai.
In May 2024, when the RCMP made arrestation on the Nijjar case. In addition, I spoke on several occasions to the then High Commissioner of India to Canada. The Prime Minister also discussed the matter at the G20 in New Delhi last year with Prime Minister Modi. The Government of India's response was to spread a false narrative that Canada showed them no evidence and that we were ignoring their concerns about Khalistani violence extremism. After months of investigation and several updates, the RCMP approached the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and I in late August of this year to present serious concerns for public safety and explore all potential tools available to us to disable India's network in Canada. This unprecedented request from the RCMP during an ongoing investigation spoke to the seriousness of the risk posed to Canadians and people living in Canada. The evidence revealed the modus operandi used by India to target people living in Canada. The Government of India mode of operating starts with the collection, of information on Canada's based individuals through diplomats and consular officials in Canada, and also other individuals acting as proxies. Some of these individuals and businesses were coerced and threatened. This information is then shared with senior levels of the government of India, who then direct the commission of serious criminal activities against Indo-Canadians through the kinetic use of Lawrence Bishnoi's organized crime network. Bishnoi is currently in jail in India and is able to order these actions through his gang, which has extensive criminal networks in India and internationally. Serious crimes committed in Canada include homicides, assassination plots, perpetrated extortions, and other extreme violence. Given how alarming the evidence was, we knew we had to act and act quickly. Our actions were driven by a pressing and serious concern for public safety. We needed the agent of the government of India to stop their illegal activities in Canada and sought a collaborative approach with Indian officials. Nous nous sommes préparés à 3
We prepared ourselves for 3 scenarios for the government of India's possible reactions. First of all, cooperative, where India ceases its activities in Canada and demonstrates accountability. Somewhat cooperative reaction, or an uncooperative reaction, no accountability and denial. Of course, our desired outcome to address the public safety concerns of Canada was without any doubt the cooperative scenario.
To meet their Indian counterparts to share evidence on 2 unsuccessful occasions. First, the RCMP was scheduled to travel to India to meet with their law enforcement counterparts. Unfortunately, India used an administrative technicality to block this meeting from occurring. Second, the RCMP traveled to Washington on October 10, while the Indian officer confirmed the meeting, they never showed up. To signal the seriousness of the matter, the RCMP Deputy Commissioner, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and myself traveled to Singapore to meet with the India National Security Advisor on October 12. The Deputy Commissioner spoke to and demonstrated a body of evidence that established clear links between agents of the government of India and violent criminal activities taking place in Canada. We provided 3 options to the India National Security Advisor that would allow us to address public safety and accountability. The first option was to waive immunities of the diplomats and consulate involved in the scheme to allow for the RCMP to question them. The second option, the comprehensive option, was for India to take accountability and manage the violence by first stopping their illegal activities in Canada, including directing Bishnoi to cease and desist. Second, by issuing a public statement to adopt a mechanism to look into the modus operandi within India, as they have done with the US case. Third, by recalling their diplomats involved in the scheme. And fourth, finally, by announcing a new India-Canada high-level dialogue on countering extremism. If the first 2 options were to be refused, Canada would declare the diplomats persona non grata, and RCMP would issue a public statement to explain the situation to Canadians, what we call the unilateral option. In order to address Canada's serious public safety, our objective, as I said before, was the accountability option. While during the meeting, our counterpart did not refuse to look into the accountability option, he refused to acknowledge any links and deny everything we presented. We eventually agreed to pause, keep the meeting confidential, as suggested by my counterpart, and reconvene on October 14, Monday, Thanksgiving, to further discuss. Instead, government of India chose to not respect our agreement and go public the next day, Sunday, October 13, and use again their false narrative that Canada has not shown any evidence. By going public, the government of India clearly signaled that they were not going to be accountable or take the necessary actions we needed to ensure public safety. It then became clear to the RCMP that we had to take the unilateral option, meaning PNG the diplomats, and issue a public statement. We also decided to roll out our media engagement strategy to seek a broader audience and maximize impact. Deputy Minister Morrison and I spoke to the Washington Post on background late Sunday afternoon, October 13. We provided non-classified information on the action we had taken to cooperate with India and explained how the evidence showed links to the government of India conducting illegal activities against Canadians, including threats to their lives. The government of India has, from the beginning, accused Canada of engaging in a politically motivated investigation and using the Canadian media to further this. This is clearly not the case. However, we were prepared for this accusation to resurface. Therefore, we made a strategic decision to engage a respected international news outlet that had already published on the subject to ensure the record was straight and that our side of the story would be widely heard. Dans l'intérêt de la sécurité publique,
In the interest of public safety and disrupting a network fueling violence in Canadian communities, Minister Joly declared 6 accredited Indian representatives persona non grata. India reciprocated by declaring PNG 6 Canadian officials from our High Commission in New Delhi. This is not a decision that Canada took lightly. Engaging with India is a central component of our Indo-Pacific strategy. Our position should be clear. Canada remains open to cooperation with India, but we need to have a meaningful engagement from India on our grounded and serious concerns. Thank you for your time, and we are available to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We go now to Ms. Dancho for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here to discuss this very serious development. Certainly, in the RCMP Commissioner, in your own words, are an unprecedented announcement that you and others had made on October 14th, and you had said that the violence orchestrated by India has become, quote, a significant threat to public safety in Canada, with well over a dozen credible and imminent threats to life. And Commissioner Drouin, on October 14th, you said that you had clear evidence that links officials from the government of India to violent crimes in Canada, but you provided no further details at that time. And you said that you needed to protect the open investigations and court proceedings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And at that time, you were of the opinion that those details, if released, could jeopardize the investigation into the murders and other violent acts by India on Canadians and people residing in Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, and I also comment on the evidence that was presented by Deputy Commissioner Flynn in Singapore with Madame Drouin and Mr. Morrison on the schemes or the modus operandi of how the government of India operates.
And Mr. Drouin already mentioned this a bit, but you are aware, of course, of the Washington Post article from that same day on October 14th that includes details of this sensitive information that you had chosen not to share because you felt that it would jeopardize the investigation. Is that correct?
Just for clarity, there's a difference with sensitive information under national security chapeau, but this was the information that's in the article. It was more or less some information from the investigations that we're doing.
So you don't feel that the information in the Washington Post, that those details were sensitive in any way?
Not sensitive to national security as it's portrayed as national security sensitive information. It's information part of investigation, which normally we would like to keep within, but sometimes we do release some information.
So normally you would have kept those details private, but they're of course not private anymore.
I would say on occasion we have come up with some information to stimulate certain things when we're investigating, But this one here, again, is not sensitive, as I mentioned, under the national security definition.
Commissioner, why did you choose not to release the information during your press conference that was at the same time released by the Washington Post? Why were those details kept from the public in Canada?
Because I didn't think at that point it was relevant, that specific information. And again, I wasn't part of the conversation with the Washington Post.
And Mr. Drouin, you were part of that conversation with the Washington Post, is that correct?
Correct.
Correct, and you felt that those details were not sensitive and would not jeopardize any investigation?
So maybe I can share two things. So the information we shared with the journalists over there were not classified. I would like also, and the job of journalists, and maybe better than I do, but journalists have also separate sources. That's something that has to be said. As I said also in my opening remarks, this is someone who has followed India's stories many times. And the information that was disclosed in the Washington Post, I think, are also available elsewhere.
You can confirm then that the information about, for example, the Indian Home Affairs Minister and his alleged involvement in these crimes in Canada, that was not released in Canada, however. Can you confirm that? That was only released in the Washington Post, pardon me.
So this is not an information we provided to the journalists.
Pardon me, it was not information you provided?
No.
Who provided that information then to the journalist? You're not sure? But that was not yourself who provided that information, was it?
We did not.
Mr. Morrison, can you comment? Did you provide that
Sure.
information?
The journalist called me and asked me if it was that person. I confirmed it was that person.
Oh, you confirmed. So you
This
did.
is a journalist who's written extensively on this topic.
Mhm.
A journalist that has various sources.
Mhm.
He asked me if that was one of the people, and I confirmed that it was.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. In that day, you can confirm, both Mr. Drouin and Mr. Morrison, that the Prime Minister did not release these information to the Canadian public, but it was released in the Washington Post, correct?
Released in the Washington Post. Yes, I'm just racking my memory
Mhm.
for exactly what the Prime Minister said.
Mr. Drouin, you advise the Prime Minister on issues of national security and intelligence, correct? You're the top advisor in Canada, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you advise him not to release that information publicly in Canada?
So we worked with the Prime Minister and the different ministers in terms of their public statements. And I think this is what I can say. Like we advised and we review what was going to be the Q&As and the public statement by the Prime Minister and the different ministers.
I'm trying to understand why it is the Washington Post received information when the Deputy Commissioner, or pardon me, the Commissioner, the Prime Minister, the Public Safety Minister, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs did not provide that information to Canada. And in fact, Canadians wouldn't know unless they were able to read the Washington Post. I just find that quite unfair to the Canadian public that details were released in advance to the Washington Post and confirmed, according to Mr. Morrison, to the Washington Post, but not provided to Canada. Don't you find that odd?
The reason why we offered, as I said in my opening remarks, a background interview to the Washington Post was really to make sure that our side of the story will become clearly and be widely spread, especially at the international level. That was the strategy behind the background interview we gave.
Sancho. We're going now to Mr. Gahir for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. So it was a short while ago that the RCMP announced that they had evidence that agents of the Government of India are actively involved in a network of criminal activity here in Canada that includes homicide, extortion, organized crime, and interference in our democratic process. It's a network of crime that could potentially mean the involvement of some of India's highest-ranking diplomats and politicians. First of all, I'd like to just deeply thank the law enforcement agencies for your work, for uncovering this, for taking the action to protect Canadians. And as I say this, I have a deep recognition that I don't know if you folks quite know what you've done. For many Canadians of Sikh heritage, your words have confirmed what they already knew and felt. For decades in gurdwaras, in homes, behind closed doors, Sikhs knew that they were being watched, that they were being monitored, that we were being targeted. And what you've done is legitimize their concerns with the evidence and investigation that you've engaged in. Every time that there's new information that comes out or an announcement that happens, I'm asked by my colleagues, by my family, by members of the community, how are you and how is the overall community doing? And what I can say is that there's always a deep sigh of relief that their plight is not being ignored, and in fact that it's being heard and it's being acted upon. I think all Canadians can appreciate that the potential link of the murder of a Sikh and other crimes in Canada by the Indian state, it strikes at the very heart of the security that a lot of Sikhs and other communities come to Canada to find. And this is why I think your work is so critical. And I deeply thank you for that work. Ms. Drouin, my first question is for you. A criminal that is jailed in a foreign jail in India that acts on behest of the Indian government for basic immunity to carry out his operations. This is quite literally the plot of several Bollywood movies that I've watched growing up, and it's funny to see that the Indian government takes its hints from Bollywood. My question to you is: this is an individual that's being kept in an Indian jail. There's potential involvement of Indian ministers and diplomats. How far does our jurisdiction reach? What action can be taken against a Lawrence Bishnoi type figure if the evidence actually shows that there's a connection all the way through?
Do you want to have a crack at this? Your question is a very interesting one in terms of the jurisdiction we may have when it comes to law enforcement elsewhere in the world. And this is why, as I presented in my opening remarks, the cooperation mechanism and for India to take accountability and to direct Bishnoi to stop its illegal criminal activities in Canada was essential. And this is why also we wanted to use all the tools available to us, including diplomatic tools. But maybe, Commissioner, you want to add to that?
I could probably add some to that, and I just want to mention that we still have significant ongoing files right now. So to your question, if the evidence supports the involvement of an individual overseas, there's always that possibility to lay charges on Canadian soil. Then you get into the extradition process and whatnot. And if the individual's locked up for the next, I don't know how long he's locked up, that could be challenging, but doesn't mean that we have to recuse ourselves from laying any criminal charges against the individual.
Great. So maybe I can finish the plot line for that movie that the Indian government seems to be wanting to make. When that eventual connection is made between government officials that are using criminals to carry out their targeted hits, their actions that they want to carry out, they usually paint that individual as a rogue agent. And so I assume eventually that is the information that's going to come out when this investigation comes out. My other question is, we know that the Conservative Party leader has engaged in willful blindness. We know that the Conservative Party has said that their leader could be briefed via a TRM, a threat reduction measure. Are you considering briefing him in that way? And could you explain the limitations of a TRM and compared to the amount of information that he could receive if he received top secret security clearance?
Thank you. I'll start and I will go to Director to complete. So in terms of sharing information with different parties, the easiest way for sure is to be able to have a top secret conversation with leaders. That can help us in terms of managing the caucus if needs be, and it is also the simplest way. A threat reduction measure is a mechanism by which some information can be revealed, the essential and necessary information in order to manage the threat. So I will let the Director continue, but the TRM is not an equivalent of disclosing TS information to a clear individual.